it would not be fitting for me to have a last worship service with you if I don't challenge you. Or if I don't come with something like, there's something disturbing in this passage we read this morning. And so it is. Some disturbing news that we get when we read this passage. First of all, why did Jesus have to show them the wounds in his hands and in his side? We read this in a couple of these Gospels in the New Testament, where Jesus, after the resurrection, came to his disciples, and then it says specifically, after he showed them the wounds, they recognized him. Surely they walked the dusty roads of Palestine with him for 2 to 3 years. Surely they would know his face when they see it anywhere. So why this now you will see if I open your eyes? What it definitely shows us is that we have here to do with something more than a physical resurrection. And we've spoken about this. If it was a physical body resurrected from the grave, surely nobody would have had any doubt and they would have recognized him immediately. So there's something else happening here. The second thing, Jesus told his disciples they should now go out with this gospel and teach the people. And he gave them the right to forgive sins or not to forgive sins. To retain sins is the word that John uses here in the translation. The sins that you retain will not be forgiven. In other words, this is after the resurrection. According to traditional Christian dogma and theology, Jesus died for all sins. Yet here he comes and say, but not those that you retain. You know, I've just died on the cross. I've just resurrected from the grave, but not those for those sins that you decide you will retain. But if I take you back to the real meaning of the word sin, amartia, missing the point, then this makes sense. Because for those people hanging onto ignorance, those people who are ignorant and not aware of the teachings of Jesus, for sure they will keep on missing the point. And they will not have the new awareness and the new awakening that Jesus was talking about. Then this makes sense. Him telling the disciples, if there are people that stay in ignorance, so be it. Because they will never understand if they do not even believe the message directly from the disciples of Jesus Christ. And then our theme this morning, the doubting Thomas. The question about the doubting Thomas. We don't read a lot about Thomas in the 4 Gospels. And it's actually John that brings him to the foreground. In Luke 24, Luke writes again about the disciples not recognizing Jesus after the resurrection. And then Luke takes it a step further and say, Jesus ate with them. He had fish with them. Because Luke, remember, is a student of the Apostle Paul. He walked with Paul. He heard the teachings of Paul. So for Luke, it was very important in his gospel to link Jesus to the Old Testament Messiah, to link Jesus to the sacrifices of the time, to link Jesus to the forgiveness of sin through the blood, because that is the teachings and theology of Paul. And therefore, in the Gospel of Luke, after the resurrection, Jesus ate. Now, surely you have to have a physical body if you ate fish. Yet in no other Gospel we find that. And the only sense we can make from this is that Luke was on a mission to take his teacher, Paul, the teachings that Paul brought further. And to do that, Jesus had to have a physical resurrection. That's why we have the difference between the Gospel of Luke and all the other Gospels, which sustain the feeling that it is a spiritual resurrection. It's the resurrection of the Christ. That is what's happening here. And then this Thomas came and he said, I will not believe this, because he was not there the first time Jesus met with his disciples. And he said, I will not believe this if I do not put my hand in his side or in the wounds on his hand. I will not and cannot worship an image created by men. I will not and cannot worship a theology created by men who did not understand the true power of the Christ on the cross in Jerusalem. And sadly, that is what we do. So, if I say that this morning, I consider me part of the doubting Thomas group. Those people that said, this doesn't make sense anymore. I doubt of all these stories that we have and all these interpretations that we have, especially, and that's one of the disturbing things I would probably say this morning, especially the interpretation of the church that's been indoctrinated into our heads that this Christ resurrected physically because he overcame sin through his blood and by giving his body as a sacrifice. We've spoken about that. Yet in John 11, verse 16, it is the same doubting Thomas that then speak to the disciples. Jesus was called in John 11 to his friend Lazarus, who just passed away. And they said, please come. The family need you and they need your support, and you need to be here. He was your friend. And then the other disciples told him, no, you can't go. Remember, that's the place they wanted to stone you. You are walking into the lion's den if you're going back there. And then John 11, verse 16, this doubting Thomas saying, let us also go that we may die with him. Now that doesn't sound to me like a person who does not have courage and who does not know what's going on. So the doubting story later on, I doubt about. Was it put in there to bring us a message telling us something, or why is it there? Thomas was entitled then after this event as the doubting Thomas. And these days, if we speak to people who does not agree with the daily narrative of the Christian faith, the narrative that the church pushes over hundreds of years, if somebody questioned that, we will react and say, oh, he's just a doubting Thomas. He'll get over it. He'll put his hand in the side or in the wounds on his hand. He'll come around and he will believe like we do. But for some, that never happens. Or it happens, but only temporarily. For us this morning, and I want to take you now on a quick journey through the Gospels. Now this is after the resurrection. This happened. So in the Gospel of Matthew, 2 women went to the grave. In the Gospel of Mark, 3. In the Gospel of Luke, several women. And in the Gospel of John, 1. And then later on, some others came. In the Gospel of Matthew, there is 1 angel on the stone outside the grave. In the Gospel of Mark, 1 inside the tomb. In the Gospel of Luke, 2 beside the woman. And in the Gospel of John, 2 inside the tomb. In the Gospel of Matthew, there was a guard, and the woman spoke to him. All the other Gospels doesn't mention any guards around the grave at that stage. The first appearance of Jesus after the resurrection in the Gospel of Matthew, to the woman. In the Gospel of Mark, to Mary alone. And then in the Gospel of Luke, to the Emmaus, men walking on their way to Emmaus. And in the Gospel of John, specifically Mary Magdalene. And then the emphasis that the different Gospels place on this resurrection story, Matthew places the emphasis on Jesus' authority, his commissioning, his whole mission through his teachings and what he did through his life. For Mark, it was very important to create shock and fear. Very interesting. For Luke, typically, according to his teacher Paul, it's a fulfillment of the scriptures, it's a physical resurrection. And for John, a personal encounter, a personal experience. That's why he brings doubting Thomas in, so that he can demonstrate through the doubt of Thomas the personal experience that Thomas has at that stage. So if we read all of these different approaches within the resurrection story, surely some of you would have doubt asking, so which one is the right one? Which one do we follow? Which one do we preach from the pulpits? That's why very cleverly in the liturgy of the church and in the lectionary of the church, we divide them. So the one year we talk about Mark, the next year about Matthew, the next year about Luke, but never together, because that will create some problems and questions. So this guy that was called the Doubting Thomas went on. And history tells us he went to Persia on his mission trip, and later even as far as the southern parts of India. And there's also a gospel that was written in his name, we believe. And some scholars, and there's quite some difference about this, most scholars these days come around and they recognize that the Gospel of Thomas is the oldest gospel that we have, more or less 50 after Christ. Mark, 70, Luke and Matthew, 80 to 90, and John, 100, even as late as 120 after Christ, are these gospels dated. Now, we rediscovered the Gospel of Thomas at the Nag Hammadi discoveries in northern Egypt, and it is part of the Nag Hammadi library, which is very interesting, because that, we believe, are the remnants of the library in Alexandria, where, remember, if I take you back, the Therapeutai, which was part of the Essene movement amongst the Jewish people when they left the temple due to all the corruption that was going on there. A certain group of those Essenes went to Egypt. They became known as the Therapeutai, and they were linked to this wisdom library in Alexandria, which was later, according to tradition, destroyed by whom? The Christians. The Christians, because they needed to protect the message. But luckily for us, some of those scriptures and manuscripts were kept in caves in Nag Hammadi, stored away, and we rediscovered it. Now, the Gospel of Thomas is also known as a Gnostic. Do you know the word gnosis, or Gnostic, or Gnosticism? At the most basic level, the term Gnostic and Gnosticism refer to a belief that is rooted in special knowledge. The term gnosis, which is a Greek word, is where we get the English word knowledge from. So if you have knowledge, you have gnosis. And that was a core belief of these Therapeutai, that there are deep messages embedded in the normal stories of the Gospels. And you need to go in deeper to get the deeper message out and the deeper knowledge. And then you will have the special personal experience that John is trying to tell us about. And that's why the Gospel of Thomas is so important, because it's a Gnostic gospel with that knowledge right in your face. No birth stories, no crucifixion, no other stories that was added to the gospel, just the teachings, hardcore teachings of Jesus Christ. In my personal opinion, I believe that the Q source, that is the so-called missing source, which most of these four Gospels used, is the Gospel of Thomas. But we don't dare say it, because in 325 after Christ, At that meeting where Caesar Constantine were the chair of a Christian church meeting, the first church meeting, where they canonized the letters of Paul and canonized the 4 Gospels and canonized a lot of books and called it the Bible, Thomas was discarded, thrown away in the dustbin because they did not understand what this gospel brought. They did not doubt like this guy doubted. They did not go down the rabbit hole like he did. And my favorite story about Thomas is this one. So when he came in the southern parts of India, he came to King Gundaphorus, the king of the region. And the king Gundaphorus was really impressed by the wisdoms this guy brought. And he said to him, I want to make you the project manager of the building of my new palace. And you will oversee the finances and oversee all the building plans. So he entrusted Thomas with all the money. And what did Thomas do? He took the money and he shared it with the poorest of the poor in the region. And the king was outraged. How dare you doing that? And Thomas's answer to him was, don't be mad. I just secure your place in heaven because I paid for that by giving everything to the poor. Now that sounds also like a Christian story. We try to secure our place in heaven by doing these kinds of things. If we are serious about our faith needs a healthy skepticism, healthy doubt, where we can ask questions and where we can try to answer them. If you go forward in this church, and I hope you will, and I will be checking on you, you have to ask questions. You have to doubt. You have to wonder. You have to go down the rabbit hole. I took you down, and I can promise you, you will never come out of it again. You will just go deeper and deeper and deeper. Because that is what this amazing teachings of Jesus does. It starts to pull you in, and you just want to know more and more and more. Not more about the stories, but more about the wisdom within those stories. You will never read some of the Gospels that we spoke about the same again. Never. Sorry I did that to you. But that's a good thing, because you will ask questions and not blindly follow teachings that we always believed was the ultimate truth. Therefore, Jesus said, if they do not want to get rid of these sins, if they do not want to get rid of missing the point, let them be. And in Luke 9, verse 62, he said the following, no one who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God. He said this to 3 men that was discussing his wisdoms with him, and they wanted to follow him, but they had excuses. The one had to go and bury his parents. The other one wanted first to go and say goodbye to his friends. They are missing the point completely, because this is not a physical following of Jesus. This is a spiritual developing and embodying of the Christ. And then Jesus told them, if you put your hand to the plow and you want to do this, don't look back. You go. Because you go now in the right direction. If you put your hand to the plow and you keep on looking back, you're not worthy of the kingdom of God. Do you hear that? Faith United? You're not allowed to look back. You understand that? You have to go forward with strength, with doubt, unstoppable. Otherwise, you'll have to deal with me. Anyway. I want to give you a message today. And I want you to listen very carefully. The earth herself cries out beneath our feet. The waters stir. The winds howl. the forests fall silent, and still we doubt. We pretend not to hear, not to notice. We who were born from the light, we who once danced amongst the stars, we who carry the codes of the ancient spirit in our bones, we have been lulled into forgetting. We have been poisoned, not just in body, but in soul. Our food laced with death, our skies veiled with poison, our minds flooded with noise. They crafted for us golden cages, cages we call safety, success, even normal. They fed us lies in our schools. They fed us poison in our homes. They fed us fear in our religions. And we ate, we drank, we believed, never to doubt them, until now. Now our souls stir again. Now the roar returns to our blood. Now the sacred ache in our chests can no longer be silenced. Now the awakening is upon you. Here today, we were never meant to live on our knees. We were never meant to serve dying earthly kings. We were never meant to drown in a system built to consume our spirit. We were meant to be creators, builders, flames that could not be extinguished. And the hour has come when all will be revealed. Look around you. The false thrones crumble. The false empires rot. The false prophets flee from the intensity of the true light. We are witnessing the end of the world as we knew it, not the end of the earth, the end of the lie. And whether you rise or fall now depends only on the choice you make in this hour, in this day. Not tomorrow, not someday, not when you are ready, now. There is no comfortable middle ground left. Either you rise into your sacred memory, or you are swept away with the ash of dead empires. The earth will no longer wait for you. The light will no longer beg for you. The gates are open. The sword is drawn. The trumpet has sounded across every dimension. You who feel this fire rising inside your bones, you who know the matrix lies are crumbling, you who can no longer pretend to be asleep, you are the bringers of the dawn. You are the builders. You are the returners. You carry the memory of worlds built in truth and beauty. You carry the map back to sacred living. You carry the light that no king, no government, and no machine can kill. And you are being called forth now to awaken, to arise, to rebuild. Not tomorrow, not when it feels easy, not when you are ready. Now, stand up even if your legs are trembling. Speak truth even if your voice is shaking. The earth needs your breath. The children need your strength. The future needs your courage. The old world is dead. Those who stay chained to it will die with it. But those who rise into the Christ will inherit the earth reborn. Choose boldly, fearlessly. Choose the light, that has always burned inside you, or be swept away into the nothingness of forgotten souls. Let the earth shake, let the skies roar. The children of light will never kneel again. It is written, it is sealed, it is unstoppable. Amen.